came to the west hoping to be chosen, but ended up completely alone. As the train prepared to take her back to a life she no longer belonged to, a little voice stopped everything. And what happened next changed not just her future, but the life of a father and his daughter forever. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The autumn wind of 1878 cut through the wooden platform of Silver Creek Station, like a knife through butter, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant promise of winter. Catherine Morgan stood perfectly still, her gloved hands clutching a worn leather suitcase, watching as the last potential suitor walked away without a backward glance. She was the 5th mail-order bride to arrive that month, and the 3rd to be rejected that very afternoon. Her emerald eyes, once bright with hope during the long journey from Boston, now reflected the gray clouds gathering overhead. The jade-colored traveling dress she wore, carefully mended and pressed for this momentous occasion, suddenly felt like a costume for a play that had been canceled. Catherine was 24 years old, tall and graceful, with auburn hair pinned elegantly beneath a modest hat, but none of that seemed to matter to the men who had come seeking wives. "Too educated," the first rancher had muttered, tipping his hat politely before mounting his horse. "Too refined for ranch life," the second had declared, his eyes unable to meet hers. The third hadn't even spoken, simply shaking his head after a brief introduction. The fourth had been kinder, explaining gently that he sought someone more experienced with frontier hardships. And now the fifth, a merchant from town, had politely declined after a 10-minute conversation, citing incompatibility. Catherine felt the weight of failure settling on her shoulders like a heavy woolen cloak. Behind her, the other rejected brides from previous days had already departed on the eastbound train, returning to whatever lives they had left behind. The station master, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Harrison, approached with sympathy etched across his weathered face. "Miss Morgan, the evening train back to Denver leaves in 2 hours," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the wind. "From there, you can catch a connection east. I'm truly sorry things didn't work out." Catherine nodded mechanically, her throat tight with unshed tears. She had sold everything she owned in Boston to make this journey. Her position as a school teacher had been given to another, her modest apartment rented to a new tenant, and her savings depleted by travel expenses. The thought of returning east with nothing, facing the pitying looks and whispered judgments of her former community, filled her with a dread deeper than any she had known. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," she managed to reply, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I'll wait inside." She turned toward the small station building, each step feeling heavier than the last, when a sound stopped her. It was a child's voice, high and clear, cutting through the melancholy atmosphere like a beam of sunlight through storm clouds. "Father, look! Another pretty lady." Catherine turned to see a little girl running across the platform, her dark braids flying behind her like ribbons in the wind. The child couldn't have been more than 6 years old, wearing a simple cotton dress and moccasins that spoke of Apache heritage. Her round face glowed with excitement, and her dark eyes sparkled with innocent enthusiasm. Behind her, moving with the measured grace of someone accustomed to being watched and judged, came a man who made Catherine's breath catch unexpectedly. He was tall and powerfully built, his broad shoulders and muscular frame evident even beneath the practical clothing of a frontiersman. His features bore the strong, handsome lines of his Apache ancestry, with high cheekbones, a straight nose, and a firm jaw that suggested both strength and determination. His long black hair was tied back, and his dark eyes held a depth of intelligence and wariness that spoke of a man who had learned to navigate 2 worlds. He appeared to be in his early 30s, and despite the caution in his expression, there was an undeniable nobility in his bearing. The little girl reached Catherine first, stopping just a few feet away and studying her with the frank, curious gaze that only children possess. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked, her English clear but touched with the soft inflections of another tongue. "Amma, we shouldn't disturb the lady," the man said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying a warmth that contradicted the guardedness in his eyes. He spoke with careful precision, as if each word was chosen with intention. But the child ignored her father's gentle warning, her attention fixed entirely on Catherine. "My name is Amma. That means water in my mother's language. What's your name?" Despite the heaviness in her heart, Catherine found herself smiling at the girl's directness. There was something irresistibly genuine about this child, something that pierced through her despair. "My name is Catherine. It's very nice to meet you, Amma." "That's a beautiful name," Amma declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. Then, with the bluntness that often accompanies innocence, she asked, "Why do you look so sad? Did someone make you cry?" Catherine felt her carefully maintained composure wavering. She knelt down to be at eye level with the child, her skirts pooling around her on the weathered platform. "I came here hoping to start a new life," she explained gently. "But things didn't work out the way I planned. Sometimes that happens to people." Amma's small face creased with concern. She reached out and touched Catherine's hand with her own tiny one. "That's what happened to my father too. People don't always want to give him a chance because of how he looks. But he's the best father in the whole world, and he's very smart and kind." The man, who had remained a respectful distance away, now stepped closer. Catherine could see embarrassment flickering across his strong features, mixed with something that looked like resignation. "Amma, please," he said quietly, but there was no real reproach in his tone, only a tired acceptance of a situation he had likely faced many times before. Catherine stood slowly, her eyes meeting his for the first time. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, marks of both laughter and hardship. His gaze was direct but not aggressive, assessing but not presumptuous. There was an intelligence there that immediately commanded respect, and beneath the wariness she sensed a deep well of loneliness that mirrored her own. "I apologize for my daughter's forwardness," he said, his English impeccable, bearing only the slightest accent. "She means well, but she doesn't always understand the complexities of adult situations." "There's no need to apologize," Catherine replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Your daughter is charming, and her honesty is refreshing." A flicker of surprise crossed his face as if he hadn't expected such a response. For a moment they simply stood there, two people from vastly different worlds, connected by the innocent enthusiasm of a child and the shared experience of rejection. Amma, however, was not content to let the moment pass in silence. She tugged on her father's sleeve insistently. "Father, this is the sign. You said we should wait for a sign, and here she is. She's perfect." "Amma, that's enough," the man said more firmly, though Catherine could hear the affection underlying his words. He looked at Catherine with an expression that mixed apology with something else, something that might have been desperate hope quickly suppressed. "My daughter has gotten certain ideas into her head. Please don't feel uncomfortable." But Catherine found she wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, she was curious. "What ideas would those be?" Amma answered before her father could speak. "Father needs someone to help raise me properly. He does his best, but he says I need a woman's guidance, and I need a mother. All my friends have mothers, and I want one too." The brutal honesty of the statement hung in the air. Catherine saw the man's jaw tighten, saw the pain and pride warring in his expression. She understood immediately the impossible position he was in. A mixed-blood man raising a half-Apache daughter in a territory where prejudice ran as deep as the rivers. "Amma, we've discussed this," he said quietly, his hand resting gently on his daughter's shoulder. "It's not that simple." "But, Father, you came here today to meet one of the bride ladies, didn't you?" Amma persisted with the relentless logic of a child. "You told grandfather you were going to try, even though you said they probably wouldn't want to marry someone like you." Catherine's heart constricted at the raw vulnerability in those words, spoken so innocently by a child who didn't fully grasp their weight. She looked at the man with new understanding, seeing not just his striking appearance and quiet dignity, but the courage it must have taken for him to come here today, knowing the likely outcome. "Is that true?" Catherine asked softly. "Were you here to meet the mail-order brides?" The man's dark eyes held hers for a long moment, and Catherine saw the internal struggle playing out across his handsome features. Pride warred with honesty, caution with the faint glimmer of hope that Amma's words had ignited. Finally, he nodded slowly, his posture straightening as if preparing for yet another rejection. "Yes," he admitted, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won dignity. "I came here today with that intention. My name is Marcus River. I'm a scout and translator for the fort, and I own a ranch about 15 miles north of here. I've been raising Amma alone since her mother died 3 years ago from fever. I thought perhaps one of the women coming west might be willing to consider a man of mixed heritage, someone who could provide a good home and honest work, even if society doesn't always look favorably upon such arrangements. Catherine felt something shift inside her chest, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. Here was a man who had faced the same rejection she had, probably more times and with far greater prejudice. Yet he stood before her with his head high, his love for his daughter evident in every word, his integrity shining through despite the vulnerability of his admission. "Did you speak with any of the other women?" Catherine asked, already suspecting the answer. Marcus's expression grew distant, guarded. "I approached 3 of them. 2 walked away the moment they saw me. The 3rd listened politely, but said she couldn't possibly consider marrying a savage, even a half-civilized one." His voice remained steady, but Catherine could hear the pain beneath the careful control. "I had decided to leave when Amma spotted you. I apologize if our presence has caused you any distress." "Distress?" Catherine repeated, and suddenly something inside her broke free. Years of trying to fit into society's narrow expectations, months of hoping someone would see her value beyond surface judgments. The crushing disappointment of this failed journey, all converging into a moment of perfect clarity. "Mr. River, I've been rejected by 5 men today. 5 good, respectable men who found me too educated, too refined, too unsuited for frontier life. I sold everything I owned to come here, and in 2 hours, I'm supposed to board a train back to a life that no longer exists for me." She paused, looking down at Amma, whose dark eyes watched her with rapt attention, then back up at Marcus. "So, no, your presence doesn't cause me distress. If anything, it's the first thing today that's made me feel less alone." Amma's face lit up like sunrise breaking over the mountains. She grabbed Catherine's hand and then her father's, pulling them together with the unself-conscious determination of a child who saw solutions where adults saw only obstacles. "See, Father, she understands. She's been hurt like you've been hurt. That means you can help each other." "Amma, it's not that simple," Marcus began, but his daughter cut him off with the passionate intensity only a 6-year-old could muster. "Why not? You need a wife. She needs a husband. I need a mother. You're both nice and both sad and both here right now. Grandfather says when the spirits bring people together at the right time, we should pay attention." Catherine found herself laughing, a real laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, surprising her with its genuineness. "She makes a compelling argument, Mr. River." For the first time, she saw Marcus smile, and it transformed his entire face. The wariness receded, revealing warmth and intelligence and something that might have been hope, carefully restrained by years of disappointment. "She's quite skilled at debate when she sets her mind to something. I suspect she gets that from her mother, who could argue the sun into setting early if she felt strongly enough about it." The tender way he spoke of his late wife touched Catherine deeply. This was a man who had loved and lost, who carried his grief with dignity while still moving forward for his daughter's sake. She found herself wanting to know more about him, about his life, about the courage it took to navigate a world that judged him for the color of his skin and the heritage in his blood. "Mr. River," Catherine said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "I know this is highly unconventional, but would you be willing to talk with me? Not here on the platform, but perhaps somewhere we could sit and discuss this possibility that your daughter has raised." Marcus's eyes widened slightly, surprise breaking through his careful composure. "You would consider such a thing? Even knowing the difficulties you would face as the wife of a half-breed, the whispers, the isolation, the prejudice that would extend to you simply by association. I've faced whispers and isolation my entire life for being too intelligent, too outspoken, too different from what society expected a woman to be," Catherine replied with quiet conviction. "At least in this case, I would be facing them alongside someone who understands what it means to be judged unfairly. And I would be doing something meaningful, helping to raise a remarkable little girl who deserves every opportunity in life." She looked directly into his eyes, letting him see her sincerity. I won't pretend this isn't happening quickly, or that I'm not frightened by the enormity of such a decision. But I came west looking for a new beginning, for a purpose beyond the narrow confines of the life I left behind. Perhaps this is exactly the beginning I was meant to find. Amma bounced on her toes, practically vibrating with excitement. Can we go to the restaurant, Mrs. Chen makes the best apple pie and we can talk there. Please, father. Marcus looked at his daughter, then at Catherine, and she could see him wrestling with hope and fear, desire and caution. Finally, he nodded slowly. If you're certain, Miss Morgan, I would be honored to speak with you further, but I insist on complete honesty between us. You deserve to know exactly what kind of life you would be entering. I wouldn't want anything less than complete honesty, Catherine assured him. And please call me Catherine. Then you must call me Marcus, he replied, and there was something in the way he said her name with such careful respect that made her heart beat a little faster. Mr. Harrison, who had been watching the entire exchange from a discreet distance, approached with a knowing smile. Miss Morgan, should I cancel your reservation on the evening train? Catherine took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood at the edge of a precipice, about to leap into unknown territory. But Amma's small hand was warm in hers, and Marcus's dark eyes held a promise of honesty and integrity that she hadn't found in any of the men who had rejected her today. Yes, Mr. Harrison, she said firmly. Please cancel my reservation. I believe I'll be staying in Silver Creek after all. The walk to Mrs. Jen's restaurant took only 10 minutes, but it felt like a journey into an entirely new world. Amma chattered constantly, pointing out various buildings and telling Catherine stories about the town, with the enthusiastic detail only a child could provide. Marcus walked beside them, carrying Catherine's suitcase without being asked, his presence both protective and respectful. The restaurant was a modest establishment with clean windows and cheerful yellow curtains. Mrs. Chen, a petite woman with sharp eyes and a welcoming smile, greeted them warmly, showing no surprise or disapproval at the unusual trio. She seated them at a corner table and brought tea without being asked, along with the promised apple pie for Amma. Once they were settled, Marcus began to speak, his hands wrapped around his teacup, his gaze steady and direct. My father was a cavalry officer. My mother was Apache. He loved her deeply, married her properly despite the scandal it caused, but he died when I was 12, killed in a skirmish with raiders. My mother returned to her people, and I grew up between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. He paused, taking a sip of tea, and Catherine could see the memories playing across his face. I learned English and Spanish from my father, Apache, and some Navajo from my mother. I can track anything that moves, read signs in the desert that most men would miss, and I speak 5 languages fluently. The Army values these skills, so they employ me as a scout and translator. I'm paid well and treated with professional respect, but socially I exist in a gray area that makes many people uncomfortable. Tell her about the ranch, father, Amma prompted, her mouth ringed with apple pie filling. Marcus smiled at his daughter with such tenderness that Catherine felt her throat tighten. I bought land about 6 years ago, built a house, started raising horses. Good horses, strong and smart. I have contracts with the fort and with several ranchers who appreciate quality stock, even if they wouldn't invite me to dinner. He looked directly at Catherine, his expression serious. I can provide a comfortable life, Catherine. Not luxurious, but solid. The house is well built, with 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen and glass windows. We have reliable water from a spring, good grazing land, and I've planted fruit trees and a vegetable garden. Amma has her own room, decorated with things her mother made. You would have your own space as well, until or unless you decided otherwise. The careful way he phrased that last part, respecting her autonomy and choice, impressed Catherine deeply. And what would you expect from a wife, Marcus? What would this arrangement entail? Honesty, he answered immediately. Kindness to Amma. Respect between us, even if love takes time to develop or never comes at all. I would never force myself on you, Catherine. If you agreed to this marriage, we would proceed at whatever pace felt right to both of us. My primary concern is giving Amma the guidance and care she needs, the kind of motherly influence I can't provide, no matter how hard I try. Amma reached across the table and took Catherine's hand. I promise to be good, and listen and learn everything you want to teach me. I can already read a little, and Father taught me numbers, and I know lots about horses and tracking, but I don't know girl things. I don't know how to braid hair fancy or cook anything except beans and cornbread or how to be a proper lady like you are. Catherine felt tears pricking at her eyes. She looked at this beautiful child with her hopeful expression, at this strong, honest man who had bared his circumstances with such dignity, and she felt something settle in her soul, like a compass finding true north. I was a schoolteacher in Boston, Catherine said, beginning her own story. I taught for 6 years at a girls' academy. I loved teaching, loved watching young minds grow and expand, but I wanted more than the life offered to unmarried women in polite society. I wanted my own home, my own family, the freedom to make decisions without constantly worrying about propriety and reputation. She smiled sadly. I thought coming west as a mail-order bride would give me that freedom. Instead, I discovered that I was still being judged, still found wanting because I didn't fit the expected mold. Too educated, they said, as if knowledge was a flaw. Too refined, as if grace and manners would melt away in the frontier sun. Marcus nodded, understanding. They wanted someone they could mold, not someone who already knew her own mind. Exactly, Catherine confirmed. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I may be educated and well-mannered, but I'm not fragile. I'm not afraid of hard work or frontier life. What I'm afraid of is being diminished, being asked to be less than I am. What I'm afraid of is a life without purpose or meaning. She looked at Amma, then back at Marcus. If I agreed to this, I would be a real mother to Amma, not just a caretaker. I would teach her everything I know, help her navigate both worlds she belongs to, prepare her for whatever future she chooses. I would be a partner to you, Marcus, in building this life. I would face whatever prejudice came our way with my head high because I would know I was exactly where I was meant to be. Marcus's expression shifted, something deep and profound moving behind his eyes. You would truly do this? Bind your life to mine, knowing the challenges we would face? I believe I would, Catherine said, and as the words left her mouth, she felt the truth of them resonating in her bones. But I need to know one more thing, Marcus. Can you accept me as I am? My education, my opinions, my desire to be more than just a decorative addition to your household? Catherine, Marcus said, and his voice carried the intensity that made her breath catch. I would consider myself the most fortunate of men to have a wife of intelligence and strength. Amma needs someone who can teach her to think, to question, to stand firm in who she is despite what others might say. I need someone who can be my equal, my partner, not just someone who cooks and cleans and asks no questions. He reached across the table, his large hand hovering near hers, asking permission without words. Catherine placed her hand in his, feeling the rough calluses of hard work, the strength tempered with gentleness, the warmth that spoke of life and vitality. Then I believe we have an understanding, Catherine said softly. Amma let out a squeal of delight that made several other diners turn and stare, but Catherine found she didn't care. The little girl launched herself from her chair and wrapped her arms around Catherine's neck, hugging her with the fierce enthusiasm of childhood joy. You're going to be my mother. My real mother. I knew the spirits would bring you to us. I knew it. Over Amma's dark head, Catherine's eyes met Marcus's, and in that shared glance she saw hope and possibility, and the beginning of something that might, with time and care, become love. The wedding took place 3 days later in the small office of Judge Thornton, a gruff but fair-minded man who had known Marcus for years and respected his integrity. Catherine wore a simple dress of deep blue that she had purchased from the general store, and Marcus stood beside her in his finest clothes, his long hair neatly braided in the traditional Apache way. Amma served as their only witness, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning, her face glowing with happiness. As Judge Thornton pronounced them husband and wife, Catherine felt a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. This wasn't the fairy tale wedding she had once imagined as a young girl in Boston, but it was real and honest and filled with promise. When Marcus gently kissed her cheek, respecting the newness of their bond, She felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with the beginning of genuine partnership. The journey to the ranch took most of the afternoon, traveling by wagon over rough terrain that gradually gave way to rolling hills, dotted with juniper and pine. Marcus drove with practiced ease, pointing out landmarks and explaining the geography with the expertise of someone who knew every rock and stream. Amma sat between them, alternating between excited chatter and contemplative silence, occasionally reaching out to touch Catherine's arm as if to reassure herself that this wonderful dream was real. When the ranch house finally came into view, Catherine felt her breath catch. It was larger than she had expected, built from solid timber with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. The setting sun painted the walls in shades of gold and amber, and smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting that someone had prepared for their arrival. Beyond the house, she could see a well-constructed barn, several corrals containing beautiful horses, and gardens that showed signs of careful tending. "My grandfather is here," Marcus explained, noting the smoke. "He helps with the ranch and with Amma when I'm away on scouting assignments. He's been looking forward to meeting you." An elderly Apache man emerged from the house as they approached, his weathered face creased with dignity and wisdom. He was dressed in a combination of traditional and frontier clothing, his silver hair worn long, his dark eyes sharp and assessing. Catherine felt a moment of nervousness, wondering if this man who had lived according to Apache traditions would approve of his grandson's choice of a white woman as a wife. Marcus helped Catherine down from the wagon with careful courtesy, then turned to his grandfather, speaking in Apache. The old man listened, his gaze moving to Catherine with an intensity that made her stand straighter, determined to face this judgment with grace. Then, to her surprise, he smiled, the expression transforming his austere features into something warm and welcoming. "Grandfather says you have kind eyes and a strong spirit," Marcus translated, relief evident in his voice. "He says Amma has been talking about you non-stop since I sent word of our marriage. He welcomes you to our family and offers you the protection of our name." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected acceptance. She stepped forward and offered her hand in the traditional way, pleased when the old man took it firmly. "Please tell him I'm honored to be welcomed into your family, and I promise to care for Amma and Marcus with all my heart." The old man spoke again, longer this time, his voice carrying the cadence of storytelling. Marcus translated, his own voice thick with emotion. "He says his grandson has been alone too long, carrying grief like a heavy stone. He says you were brought here by forces greater than chance, and that Amma's mother, who watches from the spirit world, approves of this union. He gives us his blessing and asks only that we honor each other and raise Amma to be strong in both her heritages." That first evening in her new home passed in a blur of introductions to the space that would be hers. Marcus showed her through each room with obvious pride, pointing out the features he had built himself. Amma's room was decorated with beautiful woven blankets and small treasures, a mixture of Apache craftsmanship and frontier practicality. The kitchen was surprisingly well equipped, with a good stove and ample storage. And the room that would be Catherine's until she chose otherwise was spacious and comfortable, with a large window overlooking the eastern hills. "I'll be in the room next to Amma's," Marcus explained, standing in the doorway with careful respect for her space. "The walls are thick and you'll have complete privacy. I meant what I said, Catherine. We'll proceed at whatever pace feels right." That night, lying in her new bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her, Catherine reflected on the remarkable turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been a rejected mail-order bride with no future and no hope. Now she was a wife, a mother to a wonderful child, and a partner in building something meaningful. The speed of it all should have frightened her, but instead, she felt a deep sense of peace. The first weeks of marriage brought challenges that tested Catherine's resolve and revealed the depth of character in her new family. The nearby ranchers and townspeople reacted to the news of Marcus's marriage with a mixture of surprise, disapproval, and outright hostility. Some refused to acknowledge Catherine when she accompanied Marcus to town, treating her as if she had somehow diminished herself by marrying beneath her station. Others whispered behind their hands, speculating about what kind of woman would willingly bind herself to a half-breed. But Catherine had faced social ostracism before, and she refused to let it diminish her or her new family. She held her head high in town, spoke politely but firmly to those who showed disrespect, and gradually won over a few key allies, including Mrs. Chen, the postmaster's wife and, surprisingly, Judge Thornton's sister, a formidable widow named Adelaide Thornton, who declared that anyone with the courage to follow their heart deserved respect. The real revelation came in the daily rhythms of ranch life and family. Catherine discovered that Marcus was an exceptional teacher, patient and thorough, as he showed her the practical skills she would need. He taught her about the horses, how to read their moods, and handle them with confidence. He showed her the medicinal plants that grew wild on their land, and explained their uses with the detailed knowledge passed down from his mother. He involved her in decisions about the ranch, valuing her educated perspective on bookkeeping and business matters. With Amma, Catherine found a purpose that filled her heart in ways she had never anticipated. The little girl was bright and eager, soaking up knowledge like desert soil absorbing rain. Each morning they spent 2 hours on formal lessons reading, writing, arithmetic, and geography. Catherine used her teaching skills to make learning engaging, creating games and stories that incorporated both Apache traditions and classical education. Amma flourished under this attention, her confidence growing with each new accomplishment. But it was the quiet moments that truly bound them together. Amma teaching Catherine how to braid hair in the Apache way, their fingers working together, as the little girl shared stories her grandmother had told her. Catherine reading aloud in the evenings while Marcus worked on tack, and Amma curled against her side, the firelight creating a cocoon of warmth and safety. The three of them working in the garden together, Amma's laughter ringing out as she discovered a family of rabbits hiding among the vegetables. And slowly, carefully, something deeper began to grow between Catherine and Marcus. It started with shared glances across the dinner table, appreciation for small kindnesses, respect for each other's strengths. Marcus began seeking her opinion on ranch matters, genuinely listening to her suggestions and often implementing them. Catherine found herself watching him work with the horses, admiring not just his physical strength, but the gentleness and patience he showed the animals. One evening, about 6 weeks after their marriage, they found themselves alone on the porch after Amma had gone to bed. The grandfather had retired to his own small house near the barn, and the ranch was quiet under a canopy of stars more brilliant than any Catherine had seen in Boston. "Are you happy here, Catherine?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice carrying a vulnerability that touched her heart. "Truly happy? Or do you regret this choice?" Catherine turned to look at him, this strong, honorable man who had given her a home, a purpose, and a family. "I'm happier than I've ever been," she said honestly. "Marcus, I came west looking for something I couldn't even name. I thought I wanted a traditional marriage, a conventional life, but what I really wanted was to be valued for who I am, to use my abilities in meaningful ways, to be part of something real." She reached out and took his hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "You've given me all of that. You've treated me as an equal partner, respected my mind, welcomed my contributions. And Amma, she's brought a joy to my life I never knew was possible. How could I regret any of this?" Marcus's fingers tightened around hers. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I came to that train station, I was desperate. I told myself I was doing it for Amma, that I needed to find her a mother. But the truth is, I was lonely. I was tired of facing the world alone, tired of being judged and found wanting, tired of having no one to share my thoughts and dreams with." He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes reflecting starlight. "I expected at best to find someone who would tolerate me for the security I could provide. What I found was you, a woman of intelligence and courage, beauty and strength. Someone who sees me, truly sees me, not as a half-breed or a savage or a convenient solution, but as a man worthy of respect and partnership." Catherine felt her heart hammering in her chest. "Marcus, I see you. I see your integrity, your kindness, your dedication to Amma and to building a good life. I see the way you navigate between two worlds with dignity and grace. I see the strength it takes to maintain your identity while facing constant prejudice." She paused, gathering courage. "And I've come to realize something else. What began as a practical arrangement, a solution to both our problems, has become something much more. I find myself thinking about you during the day, looking forward to our evening conversations, feeling proud when I watch you work. I care about you, Marcus, deeply. Marcus's breath caught. He raised his free hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek with a tenderness that made her eyes fill with tears. Catherine, I've been falling in love with you since the moment you knelt down to speak with Amma at eye level, treating a half Apache child with the same respect you would give anyone. Every day since then, I've watched you face challenges with courage, treat my family with kindness, and bring light into spaces that had been dark for too long. He leaned forward slowly, carefully, his eyes asking permission. Catherine closed the distance between them, and their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their growing love. It was gentle and sweet, and filled with the recognition that what they had built together was rare and precious. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little faster, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Catherine River, not just for what you do for Amma or for this ranch, but for who you are. Your brilliant mind, your compassionate heart, your unshakable integrity. I love you too, Catherine whispered, the words feeling absolutely right. I love the man you are, the father you are, the partner you've been to me. I love this life we're building together. The sound of the door creaking open made them both turn. Amma stood in the doorway in her nightgown, a knowing smile on her small face. I knew it, she declared with satisfaction. I knew you would fall in love for real. The spirits told me. Marcus laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. And since when do the spirits speak to 6-year-old girls? Since always, Amma replied with absolute confidence. She ran to them, and they opened their arms, creating a circle that enclosed all three of them. We're a real family now, aren't we? Not just pretending or practicing, but real. Yes, sweetheart, Catherine said, kissing the top of Amma's head. We're a real family, forever. 3 months later, as autumn painted the hills in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine stood on the porch watching Marcus and Amma work with a young colt in the corral. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, marveling at the new life growing there, the baby that would join their family next spring. She had written to Adelaide Thornton just that morning, sharing the news and asking if she would stand as godmother, a request that had been joyfully accepted. The ranch was thriving under their combined efforts. Catherine's bookkeeping had revealed inefficiencies that, once corrected, increased their profits significantly. Her suggestion to offer reading and arithmetic lessons to ranch hands' children had created goodwill with neighboring spreads and established her as a valued member of the community. Even some of those who had initially shunned them had gradually softened, won over by Catherine's grace and the undeniable success of the River Ranch. Marcus had recently been promoted to Chief Scout at the fort, a position that recognized his exceptional skills and came with increased pay and respect. More importantly, he had been invited to help negotiate with Apache bands who were being pressured to relocate to reservations, his unique position between cultures making him an ideal mediator. It was difficult, often heartbreaking work, but he approached it with the same integrity he brought to everything else. And Amma was flourishing in ways that filled Catherine with pride. The little girl could now read fluently in both English and Spanish, solve complex arithmetic problems, and possessed a knowledge of geography that rivaled many adults. But more than academic achievement, she had grown in confidence and grace, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and valued exactly as she was. As Catherine watched, Marcus looked up and caught her gaze across the distance. The smile he gave her was brilliant, full of love and promise and the deep contentment of a man who had found his place in the world. She smiled back, her heart overflowing with gratitude for the path that had led her here. She had come to Silver Creek Station rejected and alone, believing no one wanted her. But Amma had seen what others had missed, had recognized in Catherine exactly what their family needed. That innocent voice declaring, "Father need mommy for me," had changed everything, opening a door to a life more fulfilling than anything Catherine had imagined. Marcus jogged over to the porch, leaving Amma to continue working with the colt under her grandfather's watchful eye. He climbed the steps and pulled Catherine into his arms, kissing her thoroughly before resting his hand over hers on her stomach. "Happy?" he asked, echoing that question from months ago. Incredibly happy, Catherine replied, and it was the absolute truth. I found everything I was looking for and so much more. I found love, purpose, family, and a future brighter than I ever dreamed possible. We found each other, Marcus corrected gently. Two people who didn't fit in the worlds we came from, who created our own world where we both belong completely. From the corral, Amma called out, "Come watch, the colt is finally trusting me." Hand in hand, Catherine and Marcus walked down to join their daughter, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They were a family forged not by convention, but by choice, not by society's expectations, but by love, courage, and the willingness